there's always more to the story. Join your host, Dr. Eric Shaw, prosecutor Ryan Frank, writer Adrian Bonenberger, and comedian Ryan Connor as they follow up on the most recent episode of Baggage. This is Carry On.
My episode was beginning of the year. You guys probably don't even remember it as you know, as well as probably the listeners. I think we should start with a redemption, Ryan. Do you remember the opening for my episode?
I just listened to it yesterday. That was actually a really solid episode. We did a good job with that, considering we were still kind of getting our flow.
A redemption? What happened? I can't remember.
You did the intro.
You did a great intro, but there was just some quirky mistakes.
All right. Well,
the fact that you think you did. Okay. Well, let's do this. Ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You're doing the introduction. Go ahead. Theme song just finished. Go ahead.
Oh, what a song that was. Thank you for listening to Baggage Carry On Edition. We got a doozy for you today, let me tell you. With us, we have us and no one else. Of course, there's me, Ryan Connor. I'm a comic and I'm bad at intro stuff. We got Eric, who's a doctor. We have Adrian. Adrian's a journalist and much more. And then we have Ryan Frank, the main Ryan from the show. He's a prosecutor of, if you've ever seen SVU, he's one of the good guys.
Nailed it. I think we're good. I think any listener that was like, man, I don't know if Ryan's going to do the intro again. I'm glad he did. I think we're all.
Did I misrepresent anyone? I remember I went with a long O sound on Adrian's last name last time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You got I think everything was accurate this time, at least. Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing I would say, because I've struggled to describe myself to others as well, like journalist and writer is pretty, vague, but also accurate. I actually think somehow over the course of my life, I've lined it up so that I can reasonably describe myself as an adventurer, which is like,
there you go.
That's an odd thing, but I've been to so many different places and done very like peripatetic and odd idiosyncratic things. I think it's reasonable to describe myself as an adventurer at this point, not in the Dungeons and Dragons sense.
I was just about to say that's like a D&D character kind of title.
Should me to punch that in? You may say, and adventurer. And
no, I'm saying it because I think it's that's a weird. I wouldn't even really want to be introduced that way, but I also think it's probably accurate to say that's.
Yeah,
I like the idea of taking that and isolating that soundbite of you, Ryan Connor, at adventure and dropping it in every episode up until this point. Even when it's like me doing the introduction, it's like, and Adrian Bonenberger, adventurer.
Yeah, adventurer. Also, I think if we had an arm wrestling tournament, Adrian would win. No. I would have thought that would have been Adrian's wheelhouse.
Just this week, I was down at the VA, and I've had this thing plaguing my right shoulder for like a year, and it's very odd because the doctors, Eric, you'll appreciate this as a doctor, haven't been able to diagnose it. Like we've done X-rays, we've done MRIs, and they're like, the shoulder's fine, but I can't move it entirely correctly, and it causes me pain anytime I lift weights or or do push-ups or anything. And I've told them, I'm like, look, you tell me if it's psychosomatic, tell me if it's some sort of weird nerve damage, whatever it is, I'm sure there's a way to fix it. But they're like, yeah, we don't know. So we've been slowly kind of moving through different things. This is all to say I would almost certainly lose any arm wrestling competition.
I'm going to have to modify your intro then. And we have Adrian, an adventurer, journalist, writer, and doesn't arm wrestle as well as you'd think.
Accurate.
Just made me think of the movie Over the Top.
I was just about to say,
somebody wrote backwards. That script.
Oh, dude,
which is crazy, right?
So Rachel's hometown of Petaluma. I'm not sure if it's the guy Over the Top is based on, but there's like a big bronze, some sort of like tribute, like monument to some world champion arm wrestler from there.
That's amazing.
And it's
Ugly Dog shows and world at some point, probably not anymore, but at some point,
arm
wrestling champion.
Yes, exactly.
I used to love that movie. I was 10.
Great, terrible movie.
Yeah. Anyway, so my episode from a couple weeks ago, in the listener's mind, I want to first point out that it kind of highlighted that I'm clearly the dumbest person on the show. That runs the gamut. I said runs the gambit half a dozen times. I don't think it's one of those things like that people mispronounce all the time. That doesn't sound right. Runs the gamut.
Yeah. GAMUT.
I know that now. Yeah. But I was like, can I cut that out of the episode? And it just didn't kind of make sense if I didn't. So now I got to live with it. I really do try to edit this thing to make me look a little bit smarter, but there's only so much. You lose context after a while. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, we had good feedback from the episode. Somebody highlighted that great. They loved it. Really interesting. Even with not giving details, still found it a little hard to listen to, which is kind of surprising to me because it's like my everyday life. But they also mentioned your show's called Baggage, but you didn't actually talk about the baggage part, which is a good point. That's a fair point. We didn't talk about any of my how do I cope with it or whatever. I said I don't know, but I never really went into anything. So we can cover a little bit of that today. And I got some more stories because that whole episode, the only thing I focused on was the child sexual assault stuff, but I also do child abuse, like physical assault stuff. And to me, that has been much harder to deal with. And I don't know why. I'm kind of thinking through why that is. I think it's just so... The child sexual assault stuff is, you want to believe it's so rare and so random and it's horrible and it's the worst. But the physical abuse, you just know is a lot more common, maybe, to see it. And also, some of the cases I've had, they have just been pretty bad. You know, there's been a couple child homicide stuff. I mean, that's the worst of the child abuse stuff. And also, you know, some cases that have been tried were just like, God, I remember there was one case, it was they were teenagers during the abuse and during trial, and they testified about just lengthened period of what would be considered torture. And it was really, really hard for them to get through it. Same as the last episode. I'm not going to give a lot of details to keep anybody from turning the episode off. But it was bad. They endured quite a bit and just were so strong getting through trial. I remember one of the kids, when he was done, he was visibly shaking looking at the defendant because he was so angry. And then when he was done testifying, he made it most of the way to the hallway and then just collapsed because it was just so emotionally, psychologically draining for him. But glad to hear that they're both doing amazing. One of them actually has spoken to groups about her experience and how she's stronger on the other side of it, which is pretty cool. She still has a strong affiliation with the domestic violence group home, I guess is the way I'll put it, that assists people that need to get out. They need a safe place to go. They need a cell phone. They need resources. You know, they need gas money sometimes because they have no other resources of their own. It's a success story. They faced the guy. He got convicted, and he will never see the outside of a jail cell again, which is good.
You know, one thing from the medical side versus the law side, and I know we, particularly in an outpatient pediatrics kind of setting, we very rarely see domestic violence stuff. And my student was asking me about this the other day, and I was like, well, someone who abuses their child is not going to bring them to a basic pediatrician. They or usually it's another family member will bring them to an ER if something went overboard, like they hurt them too much, or the other family member like starts to notice things and they bring them to the ER, bring them to the doctors. But like if someone is in an abusive household, like they're never going to seek medical care. And for the sexual abuse stuff, it's probably even less because that's just, they're not going to report on themselves. And many times the kids don't tell anyone for years. Mm-hmm. And so for the sexual stuff, it probably is underreported by a huge percentage. And even the physical abuse is probably not picked up nearly as prevalent or nearly as much as it's actually happening.
What I was surprised by in that case, because it was one of those cases with the teenagers where unequivocally it happened. There's no question of what was going on, but it's not like they lived under a rock. Nothing ever came up in school or socially, or he isolated them somewhat, but still you would think that how did it ever come to light? Why didn't it come to light earlier? There wasn't open wounds on someone's faces. There was a lot of well, I'll just say there was a lot of strangulation punishment kind of stuff to the point where someone's passing out. So that's not always going to leave outward marks that you could see. And the other stuff wasn't face, it wasn't obvious, so you could hide it for a while. The only reason it came to light is the defendant got arrested for something kind of minor, whatever it was. He was taken into custody and was gone for a few days, and that was the family's opening. That is when it all just came pouring out. It's like, oh my gosh, it's been going on for a long time. But most of the time where I've seen it for the physical abuse has been the schools, because you have a school-age kid. If someone just pulls them out of school, there's going to be questions. There's going to be truancy. Like, why is your kid no longer enrolled in school? So there's a motivation for the parents and the family to make sure they keep going to school, but they try to hide it. So you'll have a kid that's complaining that, my stomach hurts. I got a stomach pain. They lift up the shirt. They see all the bruises. They call CPS. They're mandated reporters. They call CPS, and the investigation starts from there. I had one case. Oh man, these brothers, both the mother and the aunt were abusing them. So for one kid, one of the brothers, the trial was with the aunt. With the other brother, the trial was with the mom. That's the direct evidence we had. Very difficult because the kids were just so turned around from, I think their entire lives had been so physically abused that it was difficult for them to talk about anything. And to say it coherently, they're very, very young. I want to say the youngest was probably 5, but he developmentally was closer to maybe 3. Very difficult to get details out of him. Who was it? What day? What, that kind of thing. They both ended up being convictions. Both were trials, separate trials. But the way it came to light initially was that kid went to school, and one of the teachers, she told me afterwards that it's the reason she left teaching. She saw that the injuries on him, and she was like, I just can't do this anymore. And she was amazing, but remember the kid very well. Didn't come to trial for a couple of years. We were able to hunt her down. And I said, do you remember so-and-so? And she was like, I will never forget him. What day is court? I will be there. And she was amazing. And the jury did not take long to consider the evidence in that. And it was sustained injury on his body over a prolonged period of time. You can't really date scars or bruises, but when there's enough of them, you can tell it happened over a period of time. And those are pretty tough. And those ones are, for whatever reason, for me, a little harder to deal with, just because you can physically see it. Almost all sexual assaults, it's their story. It's what they're saying. There's almost never any physical evidence. I'm going to say 1 in 20, maybe you get some DNA or something like that, but almost never the type of abuse, sexual abuse, you wouldn't have any forensics, so you don't see anything. Certainly it's nothing outward on their body. But with the physical abuse, it's like, here's a picture. So you're doing trial prep, you're doing preliminary hearings, you're doing bond hearings. I'm just exposed to it more. That sucks. I guess we could do it now. The worst of it was certainly a child homicide that I have. That one, it was hard the whole time, but by the time it got to sentencing, my youngest was very close to the age that the baby was when he was killed, and it was by the babysitter, daycare worker. And she, we're going into, it's a battle of the experts. Our expert was fantastic, and this is the likely cause of injury. The defense expert was just, take these 4 different injuries. Well, it could be GERD. It could be this. It could be that. So each thing would have an independent explanation that's not related to why a seemingly relatively normal, not serious health issues, maybe 4-month-old, I think he was, ended up dying. It was kind of bananas. So it was a battle of the experts. You're focusing on that. And when you get to the point where mom has to testify, that is where I really lost my composure in the courtroom. I'm going to stop for a little bit, Your Honor. And I just started crying. I was like, I couldn't. I was like, she was holding it together. It was hard, but mom was doing it. I'm the one that's losing my composure in the courtroom. It was, I wouldn't say it was embarrassing. Everybody understood it, but it was one of those like, man, as I'm usually pretty good about keeping it together and not showing my emotions on my sleeve for what I'm actually feeling. But that one was a really tough one. That was it's still, I still think about it.
How long ago was that?
The case?
Yeah.
Was probably 2 years ago. Yeah, it was almost exactly 2 years ago. Because my kid's 2.5 now.
Not as brutal, but definitely frustrating, particularly in the fact that these people were not held fully accountable for it. I don't know if you know this. You can actually Google, you can do like rate your doctor on Google and things like that. And I don't mean just like their practice. You can actually like find your doctor's name and rate them. So most people do it through the practice, but I have a couple of reviews for me specifically. And I have one 1-star review, that one. And it's the person that the grandmother in this situation that was like just livid at me after what I did with this. But it was a baby that had only ended up in the ER after he had a femur fracture. And they found multiple other fractures, which is like very stereotypical of abuse. They took the kid away from the parents and gave it to the grandmother. They did this very interesting. You talk about the battle of the experts is what made me think of this. There is a handful of these quack doctors that you can kind of either don't believe in shaken baby or don't believe in a lot of the typical stuff of abuse and like will write it off as anything but. And they found this guy and did this eval over the phone. The doctor never laid hands on him. And he diagnosed him with something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is like you have hyperflexible joints, but it does not in any way, shape, or form preclude you for, spontaneous bony fractures. You can have something called osteogenesis imperfecta, which can, but not Ehlers-Danlos. And so they brought this doctor, the guy like testified via Zoom or something at the courts, and basically got all the charges dropped. And when the baby came to me with grandma, she explained this to me, and already like alarm bells are going on. I'm like, this does not make sense at all. And also, while grandma had the baby, no other bones got broken. So that kind of blew everything out of the water there. And I was like, look, if you really want to go down this road, I think you should send, let's go over to genetics at Children's Hospital. And the doctor over there agreed with me 100%. And that's when the parents started to get back involved as well. And grandma, I think they all started to figure out kind of what we were doing. And there was all these notes like, does not want to see this geneticist again, blah, blah, blah. They still came back to see me. And they came back to see me. Dad was finally there. And I knew it was him that did it. And I told him point blank, I was like, look, I'm not going to be a part of your child's care. And I don't want to ever be around you. I know what you did. This is not acceptable. Like, you need to find a different pediatrician. And I was going to let it go. And Ryan, I think I talked to you about this one when it was happening.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. I had contacted the police several times to try to get them to open this up again, and just nothing ever happened. And I ended up with a really nasty Google review.
Yeah, that happens. It's a frustrating part too, because you'll have with the physical abuse of, there's no question this kid was harmed. And most experts would come to the conclusion that it was non-accidental trauma. Especially with really young kids, the torso area,
soft parts,
is really doesn't really break. You don't get broken ribs very often with small kids. You don't get again interior torso injuries just because it's very fleshy. If there's a broken arm or broken leg and it's a fall, it's kind of hard to say it's something else. So you'll have certain injuries sometimes where like that's suspect.
Posterior rib fractures is like the stereotypical one of like, you've squeezed and shooken the kid.
Mm-hmm. So you'll have an injury like that, and they'll notify law enforcement, CPS, they do investigation. We talk to our expert, and I'm like, yep, it's not accidental. Okay, now who done it? Who's in the house? And that can be very tricky. So many things, I said it in the last episode, so many things have to come together in a criminal prosecution, especially circumstantial one like that. You have to have medical personnel that see it and report it, which not everyone is great at that. We'll have cases that something comes up like, well, they've been seeing a pediatrician, or they went to the ER 2 weeks ago and nobody said anything. Well, they probably should have, right? So you have to have a medical personnel that catches it. You have to have, and reports it. You have to have CPS and or law enforcement that have some of the training to know that this is something that it's going to take a lot of work, and you're going to have to do a lot of background information. Sometimes you'll get a law enforcement officer that just is ill-equipped, and a nurse says, could have been a fall. Done. No one else is ever going to hear about it because the law enforcement officer's thinking, oh, okay, it's probably accidental. So you got to get by that hurdle. Then you got to get to a prosecutor where the detective's saying, look, I really think we should charge this. Here's what I've done. We have the injury to the kid. it's either during the time frame, it's either mom or it's dad. Mom is credible. She took a polygraph, not admissible in court, but just for our purposes. Dad had differing stories about what happened. He had 3 different stories about what happened, and just like really shady stuff. And sometimes it's a close call and you go ahead and charge it. It can be really a bit of a nail biter to the jury, because when it comes to the point where like, all right, we charged it, now we're in front of a jury, we have to prove this person caused the injury. Sometimes you can't do it. I mean, I've had a handful of cases, probably more than that, where no question, someone physically abused this kid. No question, it's dad. We will never have the evidence that dad did it. But dad knew of the injury. It's something where it was obvious and would have been obvious 2 days ago, and they never saw medical attention, and it could have been life-threatening. That's a different code. That's a different charge, you can say. So you charge, maybe both parents, and then somebody comes off it and says, yeah, it wasn't me, I'll testify against him, something like that. And then you run into spousal privilege, and it can get really, for me, interesting. Some people would think it's boring, but there's a lot of rules of evidence you have to navigate through. And you have detectives saying, why can't we charge this? Clearly the guy did it. I'm like, I believe you. Clearly the guy did it. But here's these evidentiary hurdles that it's never going to get to a jury. A judge is going to toss this case out before we get to a jury because it's very difficult to prove.
Can you speak more to the kind of like expert versus expert stuff? And if you run into any of those doctors that are kind of like patient advocates for the defense?
I call them hired guns. Absolutely. The one I was talking about with the child homicide, it was at sentencing that it was battle of the experts, trying to minimize it. They were trying to say that essentially the daycare worker overreacted trying to save a choking baby was the defense. I can't even remember all the medical details to call that out, but he just went down and this thing. Let's look at this choking in isolation. Yeah, it's totally possible that could have happened. And all these incredibly rare things would have had to all happen at the same time. And then he totally discounted retinal hemorrhaging is a big thing in child homicide cases, and even in non-fatal cases where you have retinal hemorrhaging. Most legitimate experts will be able to make some conclusions about that. That is repeated blunt force trauma usually, and I don't want to give details actually, but it can be very telling. So our person was like the gold standard for the state. Everyone knew her. Everyone respects her. And she testified very clearly. She testifies very well. And the other guy testifies exclusively for the defense. You can get into how much they get paid, how much you're getting paid. Well, such and such dollars. Well, there's consultation fee, and then there's testifying. So that if you give an opinion that's favorable to the defense and you have to come testify, that's a different amount. How many dollars an hour? $200 for every hour that I'm here, or something like that, or some even more. Some crazy amounts. So the people that hire private counsel usually have the means to potentially do a private expert, which you'll find them. You can not go very far and find some hired guns, and they don't care. They really don't care. This is my very biased opinion. They do not care what the result is because they're going home and they've just taken care of their car payments for 2 years. That's the kind of money. Our expert, she, I think, I can't remember if she was a expert or she was definitely an expert, but sometimes if they're a fact witness, if they're the treating physician, because sometimes she'll also be the treating physician, they don't get paid anything. Like, I got a subpoena. I just had to be here.
I've been subpoenaed for this stuff before, and we don't get anything. So
that's pretty awesome too. When that comes up in a jury trial, and how much are you being paid for your testimony? I'm not. I'm actually losing a little bit of money because I can't see any patients today. I'm just telling you what the truth is.
I have a friend from residency. I'm not going to mention her name on air. I'd love for her to be on our show, but she is a child abuse doctor in North Carolina, and she spends a shit ton of her time in court, and she does battle with these guys, and like it is just amazing. Where everything she's presenting is based in science and data and the consensus of like what we know happens with these kids. And like just the word of these quacks that can come in and sway people is disgusting. And they basically is now like for monetary gain. And despite like most of these guys have lost their licenses or been drummed out of like, whatever hospitals they work at, and they just kind of tour the country doing this now. It's disgusting.
As opposed to the government's witness who my expert probably knows your friend, by the way. It's a small enough community and bordering states.
Many of them.
Yeah, but they really do believe in what they do, and they really put their heart and soul into presentations for prosecutors and law enforcement of like, this is what you need to be looking for. And they'll just tell you the truth. I've had cases where she said, you don't have it. You cannot make the connection that you want me to make medically. It's not there. You don't have that.
We had our child abuse attending in residency we would always have lunch lectures and things like that. And she would do her lectures with pictures and everything during lunch. And it's the only time I've ever seen like multiple doctors get up, leave, very unhappy. Some people were like crying. Some people would like go up and basically throw up outside. Like the pictures and stuff that she was presenting was just so awful.
Yeah. They're really tough cases. The ones where it's intentional infliction, that is obviously some of the worst stuff. But the really sad ones too are the manslaughters. Yeah, I had several cases where very small kid wasn't properly protected from going outside to the pool and drowned in the pool. And those are just really, really sad and not criminal all the time. I would say maybe most of the time not criminal. It's just like a random set of facts that are just awful. You feel bad for the parents and makes you think twice and everything you do taking care of your own kids, but not criminal. But there have been a couple that were pretty egregious where we ended up prosecuting it. And one of them in particular, it looked like at first glance, this guy just turned his head for a second and the kid gets in the pool, because the defendant's version was he was doing work from home and he's at a table and he's watching the kids. And as they're playing outside, he went to use the bathroom real quick, came back, couldn't find the kid, searched everywhere, couldn't find the kid. And then, oh my God, I got to check the pool. By that point, it had been too late. That's really sad and probably not criminal with that set of facts. But really good law enforcement, they went in there, they'd seen these cases before. First thing they did, took pictures. Then the picture was the blinds were closed. He could not have been seeing the kids outside. There's no way he could tell where they were. The other thing was a neighbor had said that she heard a commotion. She waited 10 minutes. Let me back up. What we knew when the charges were brought was that there was a neighbor that heard a commotion, but we didn't know exactly what she had to say, time frame or anything like that. So I brought her in and I said, hey, I think this case might go to trial. It looks like it's going to go to trial. So tell me exactly what you experienced. She said, well, I heard a commotion next door. The houses are far enough away. You can't see. There's some wood. You can't really see what's going on. So I didn't do anything about it. I sat there for 10 minutes and I said to my husband, this is really bothering me. That was very strange, whatever that sound was, whatever that scream I heard. And the husband said, well, if it's bothers you that much, just go next door and talk to him. They didn't know the neighbors very well, so it was a little awkward, but she said, I'm just going to go over there. So about 10 minutes after the sound, she goes over there and she sees the defendant with the kid. And she goes, and she's asking him a question, and he's just giving her a blank stare, and he's not doing anything. And then she says, do you think, is he okay? Should I call 911? I'm going to call 911. Then he calls 911. That was what kept it from going to trial, that right there, because we had a time frame of his version was completely false. He was with that kid. The scream was he found him. And then 10 minutes later, he's only calling 911 because he sees a neighbor calling 911. So his story was shot out of the water. 10 minutes, he's sitting there with that kid, who knows doing what, trying to figure out how he's going to get out of this thing. So there was no telling how long that kid.
Right. Is this the same one as the drowning?
Yes, this is all the same one. He couldn't see the kids outside, and the neighbor heard a scream, and then she went over there 10 minutes later, and he hadn't done anything.
Is it plausible in a situation like that the kid is clearly dead and he's in shock and he's like in shock holding his kid who he knows has no chance and just not doing the right thing of calling because he's in shock? Possibly,
but his interview, what he said at the hospital, what he said to his, I think now ex-wife, but wife at the time, the version he said to her, he gave 3 different versions of his timeline and what was going on. And that was, for the defense attorney, was like, I don't know what the jury's going to believe, but they're going to believe he's a liar. So he ended up taking a plea, and we just argued sentencing, which, I think was a good call on the defense attorney's part, because I think a jury probably would have would have lit him up on a more serious charge.
Mm-hmm. Man, well, let's ask this. So, just with the nature of the podcast, are you thinking about these things all the time? Like, not when you're with your family. Let's just say the house is empty and you're sitting there. Do these things just keep going through your head?
No,
not
at all. That's why I've been doing it for 12 years. I have another, I don't know, roughly 18 years, 4 months, and 3 days until retirement. I'm just joking. I don't know. But I'm going to be doing this for a while. I'm going to be doing this, I think, until I retire if I can, if they'll have me. And I think I could probably do these same type of cases without any burnout. And I said in the last episode, I don't know why. Because they do affect me in short bursts. But there's just something in my brain that I'm kind of, I wouldn't call it disassociation, but just compartmentalize it of that's a work thing.
Yeah.
And
does the satisfaction of kind of achieving justice start to outweigh the kind of downside?
I think that's a very good point. That if I'm not going to say me, because it's a team effort, and the office as a whole also has these cases too. If we didn't have the success rate that we did, I think it would be a very different job. I think if it was 25% of the people end up being convictions, so 75% of the people that try something end up getting away with it, that would certainly weigh on me, because the losses hurt too. I mean, luckily it's not too often on the more serious cases that there's a not guilty. The vast majority of the time, a person's held accountable to some degree, maybe not the top charge, maybe a lesser included, but some degree, a jury can say, yeah, we think this thing happened. I sympathize with jurisdictions that the jury pool is just very different. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't trust the government. It's really hard to get a conviction. So defendants just try everything because some jurors will just believe any cockamamie story that you put out there. That's got to be really, really hard to prosecute in somewhere like that. Luckily, where I'm at, pretty common sense juries for the most part that I've run into. And they want to hold somebody accountable when the evidence is good enough. And the standard, I said it before, is higher than it's ever been, I believe. And still, we have juries that will convict. So that, yeah, I think that has a big part of it is the success rate. Does that answer the question on the mental health part? Because I'm still kind of exploring it. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, maybe years from now, I'll start having nightmares or something. But so far, it all makes sense to me. I can rationalize the ones that we can't prosecute. I feel confident in why we can't. The ones that we prosecute but don't get convictions, I'm like, yeah, it's a tough case. I can see why not. And the one that gets convictions, our judges, for the most part, do a pretty good job of holding the people accountable. And also, it's a community that knows that. So the defense bar knows what's at stake. They know the success rate. They know what the jury pool is like. They know what our judges would be likely to do. Like most places, probably more than most places, we end up getting pleas because even in the current climate, because defense attorneys know what our office is able to do, even on very difficult cases, which is why you have to have a strong office too. You have to have the whole office being competent. You can't have, there's one prosecutor that knows what they're doing. But the other 6, I can run circles around them. So I'm just going to try everything in this jurisdiction. That's a problem. So you have to have quality people. And then it gets into a whole laundry list of issues of quality of the work life. If you're a prosecutor and you're really good and you love doing it, but you don't get paid anything and you got to work 70 hours a week, you may as well, it's like, I'm sure like residency, right? You don't want to do a residency for your entire career. You get burned out. That's why most prosecutors' offices, I think, have a pretty decent turnover rate because of that. They'll use up the younger prosecutors, work them. And they're like, man, I can make twice as much doing defense work and spend more time with my kids. Who's going to say no to that? That's a hard decision to make.
Maybe you can speak to this just as a prosecutor and knowing people that go to the defense side. I mean, granted, this is very stereotyped from TV and things like that. It just seems like that's almost like if you go to the defense side, you're almost like selling out. Like, and I know everyone deserves their side of their day in court, but like as you said, most of these people that are in there, like they did it. Do you really want to be like? How would you sleep at night like doing that? I could never see being a defense lawyer as a satisfying job.
Just for you to weigh in on this too. I mean, yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people would say it's about getting the right, like a more fair outcome. And then, and just that everyone needs an advocate, right?
And I wholeheartedly believe in that.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues said something when I first started. I came back from court and I was just fuming. I was like, man, that defense attorney, he did this and that, and he pulled this tactic, and I could never be a defense attorney. God, I hate him. I could never be a defense attorney. And he calmly said to me, he's like, I got 2 kids. I could do it. I'm like, that's a good point. Like when push comes to shove and you need a paycheck, I work for my boss is ultimately an elected official. Every 4 years, who knows who the next person is? There is no guarantee in my job. I think I'm pretty safe, regardless of the political party. I think I'm pretty safe, but not everyone's like that. So sometimes, even if you want to keep doing it, you just can't. So sometimes it's by necessity. Overwhelming majority of defense attorneys are really decent people that are super easy to work with, and I don't have any of those feelings toward them. They are advocating for their client. They see an issue with not even anything unethical law enforcement did, but like, ooh, I think he, the new guy forgot to check this box and ask this question. It wouldn't be something as juvenile as Miranda rights or anything like that, but they're able to issue spot, and they're like, look, to protect my guy's rights, everyone's got to be held to the same standard. So we're going to have a motion to suppress. If that doesn't work, then I can read the tea leaves. He's probably going to plead guilty. Great. Let's have that motion and, make sure we get the right answer. Most of the cases I've talked about that had jury trials, most of the defense attorneys were like that. My person will not plead guilty to anything. I don't know what to tell you. I think you made a fair offer. I'm going to poke holes in your case the best I can. Or they'll be honest with me and they say, I don't think your offer is that good considering the weight of your evidence. So it's worth the risk to trial. Okay, great. Let's both do our jobs. And I do believe we have the best system in the world. Where do innocent people go to jail? Yes, it's made by humans, so it's imperfect. I think it is far less than anyone believes it is. But more often where things might, quote unquote, go wrong is a guilty person gets away with it. And that's a lot better than an innocent person getting convicted. So like I said, it is difficult in this climate, and that's not a bad thing. But as far as, could I ever be a defense attorney? Yeah, I could. I'm in such a great spot with a great office to work with, a great county that supports law enforcement and the prosecutor's office. It's my hometown where I grew up, so that's nice. There's a lot of things I like about it. I'm very, very fortunate. But if things didn't work out, I could be a defense attorney. I would have a hard time being a defense attorney for some of the cases that I'm best at prosecuting, child sexual assault. That would be tough.
That's what bothers me. And I think this comes down to like the type of things that you see in my job specifically, where like it is beaten into us through training and residency that like you are one of the primary tenets of your job is you're a child advocate. And so when we see this stuff, we're going for blood. Like we're trying to get these people, make the kids safe, do everything we can to like fix it. And you're doing the same kind of thing where like you are really trying to, defend someone who's defenseless. And it's like truly like a paladin or like a white knight. Sorry, Adrian, you're the adventurer. He's the paladin. But with this, I just can't.
Only nerds are going to know what you're talking about. But
that's okay. Fine. That's okay. That's most of the people that are listening to the show, so that's fine. But I just can't see defending that. It just seems morally and ethically wrong.
I understand. I understand that viewpoint. But most of the attorneys that defend the child sexual assaults, well, first of all, I would say most of them are probably appointed. So if you're on the court appointed list, ethically, you can say, I cannot take this case. I cannot take this case because it offends my moral sensibility. And defense attorneys will do that if their client has told them to take a course of action that they don't feel they can morally do. But usually that's not what it is. Usually it is the government has to prove their case. And it's my job to argue that is a line that is, way up here by the ceiling. And your evidence comes way down here. So it's about argument. I've seen defense attorneys struggle with it. They know we have a circumstantial weak case. And they're like, I just, as a lawyer, I got to point out what the problems are. And that's where I think my office excels, is kind of countering that of like, this is what child sexual assault looks like. This is what child abuse looks like. Anyone that's ever been held accountable, even with the circumstantial evidence, it's not impossible. You can use your common sense and find him guilty. So, it's experience and being able to argue those points. But as a defense attorney, I want to say, I'm going to misquote him, but I think it was Alan Dershowitz, one of OJ's lawyers, at some point had said, a criminal defense attorney's job is not justice. It is not justice. It is to protect the rights of your client and get the best result you can, which is working in their best interests, which if it's not guilty because you can do it, that's what you do. The line for what is ethically okay to do that varies from defense attorney to defense attorney. And man, I've seen it run the gamut on what defense attorneys are willing to do. I've seen some really, if you could prove it, would probably get them punished by the state bar for some of their conduct. But most of the time, they're smart enough not to be that brazen about it. Rare. It's rare, but you can find those attorneys. And it's really interesting too how the really shady defendants, the really bad defendants that just like anything to get out of it, they'll make the child victim out to be the problem, just really willing to go down that route. It's interesting how often they pair up with a defense attorney that matches that personality. There have been times where I've had cases like, okay, I have a pretty good sense of maybe who the defendant is, but here's a plea offer and here's, I think, a good resolution to it. And they're like, no. And I'm like, man, I'm really surprised. I guess that guy doesn't have good client control. He's just got a really stubborn client and we'll just go to trial. And then you see the tactics they use when they come out and like, okay, that makes a lot of sense now. You guys are having the exact same conversations about how to attack this victim, how to make their life a living hell just to get an acquittal. And it almost always backfires because the really good defense attorneys, the really good ones, they're soft-spoken. They are somebody you want to have a beer with. Ladies and gentlemen, that was really emotional, what we saw from that girl. And I believe that she believes all these things, but the evidence just isn't there. And it's your job to keep that standard high, blah, blah, blah. They don't attack the victim. They don't try to undermine her. They just point out the inconsistencies. They point out the holes, and then they make their argument. That's the most effective defense attorneys, are the ones that don't act like the bad guy. So yeah, if push comes to shove, I think I could be a defense attorney. I think I would like to be a DUI defense attorney. That's easy money, just nice traffic court, DUIs. Hey, it looks like the government's got a good case. Plead guilty. That's a nice way to pay the mortgage. I don't think I definitely would not have as easy as a time doing defense work in this field as I do in prosecution. That's for sure.
Yeah, this is like our most brutal carry on.
Yeah,
I know. This is basically a part 2 from the last one. You would ask me funny stories in the last episode, my episode from a couple weeks ago, and I didn't have any. I have thought about several of them. The problem is it's something not problematic, unethical, or illegal, anything that law enforcement did or an attorney did, but they're people I really like. And it would just paint them in kind of an embarrassing light. But as far as like funny stuff that happens at my work, I laugh a lot. I laugh all the time at work. And it is mostly things that would be off-color jokes that I would nothing disparaging about a victim or anything like that. Usually at the expense of a defendant. Some names. Oh, the names you get sometimes in court. I had on the same docket, I had a poussey and a boner, or we're both on the same docket on the same day. And the boner guy was funny because he was arrested, taken to the magistrate, and says, "Yeah, this is Mr. Bonner. We want to charge him with X, Y, and Z." And the guy starts screaming. He goes, "It's Boner. Pronounce it right. It's Boner." All right, dude. I would probably go with a different pronunciation and say letters, but
that's
anyway.
what you got to own that one. If that's your name and you've had it your whole life, you need to just own that.
Yeah. You get some, and the sovereign citizens ones are now funny because they're not as frequent. They're a real pain in the butt. But sovereign citizens, if anyone doesn't know, that's what they actually believe is pretty nuts. Like conspiracy theories, straw man stuff. Like they refuse to give their own name.
How does that actually go when they get to court? Because there's real consequences. Like they can't just keep throwing that shit up. Like eventually they're going to get tased or thrown to jail, or like
Yeah, it doesn't work out for them. Usually they come around and at the end of it, they're like, yes, sir, I'm Mr. Smith and I don't want to go to jail, right? But there's a really good training we had. And the judges now get this training too. So they deal with it a lot more effectively. When it first started happening, everyone was like, what do we do? I think we have to litigate why we have legal authority to arrest anybody dating back to the English common law. No, we don't do that. But this was really good training where the defendant, they videotaped it and the defendant comes in and the judge is like, you are Mr. Smith. I'm the agent of Mr. Smith. I'm sorry, what? You're the agent? You're his lawyer? No, sir. I'm the agent of the person in the body of Mr. Smith. And it goes back and forth and just like, what? He goes, oh, I see what this is. Well, okay. Agent of Mr. Smith or the body of Mr. Smith, all of you are held without bond. So you can go back to the chair.
There's a great YouTube video of a guy trying to pull this shit. And the bailiffs have just had enough of him. And I think like one of the clerks comes out and is, kind of giving this guy a drubbing down. And the guy just keeps pushing. And ultimately one of the bailiffs tased him in the nuts. And the guy is just screaming bloody murder on the ground as they take him down. And it's just like, yeah, you deserve that. Anyone who watched that is not siding with you. You were an asshole for half an hour to these guys. And they gave you every chance. And you got tasted in the nutsack.
Yeah. I had a sovereign citizen put my home address and phone number up online one time to an anti-cop website. And I'm like, oh, not cool. Oh, man. Yeah. Wow. But they've died down a little bit. We don't see them as much anymore because it doesn't work ever. Mm-hmm. They always get convicted.
Hey, this has been a carry-on edition of Baggage with our subject, Ryan Frank, following up on his episode, which you can find in the feed. Listen to that, his other episode. A lot of the same stuff, but different.
Really selling it, man. I want to listen to it again right now. Surprisingly less depressing last episode.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think so. Let's call this one Same Shit, Different Day.
I like it. We might do that. Yeah. Hey, Ryan, you got anything you got to plug? Any shows coming up?
I mean, the big thing is November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago at the Den Theater. I'm going to be recording a new special, actually 2, a different one each night.
Excellent. Check out your special that's currently online. Oh, yeah. And also your book. Very good.
Live from DC is the current special. It's on Amazon Prime and Tubi. You can buy it other places too if you want to buy them instead of watch them for free. And then my book, The Party, is available also on Amazon.
And to take this full circle to make this just extra nerdy, if we're going to finish this up with D&D stuff, so we have Ryan the Paladin, we have Adrian the Adventurer. I'm going to go with Ranger Cleric. But Ryan Connor, you were definitely the bard. You're the singing, dancing party member.
I'll take it. That's the job I'd want in that world.
How is it that you always had a girlfriend and I was a single guy? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
That's a great way to go out.
I'm charming.
Well, we all ended up with amazing significant others. So
I'm persistent.
Out.
You would always give up immediately. I was persistent.
Yeah, that's the problem. Not that no one was interested. Whatever. Now it's getting depressing.
Yeah, anyway, yeah. We should leave before this starts cutting too deep. The skin's already healed.
There's my baggage. High school. Let's talk about that subsequent episode. Jeez.
Nothing that happens now could even compare to that.
Right. No. Those stories will never see the light of day. But thanks, guys. This has been fun.
All right. Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Music for Baggage provided by Quincy Ledbetter. You can find his stuff at qledbetter.com. Graphics provided by Megan Weaver. You can find her at meganweaverart.com. Special thanks to our premium members for their support. You can become a premium member by clicking subscribe in your Apple Podcast app or by visiting thebaggagepodcast.com/support to sign up or to gift a membership to someone. A percentage of all proceeds go to charity. If you have any questions, comments, or a good story to share, please email us at thebaggagepodcast@gmail.com.